In the very beginning, according to ancient Greek mythology recorded by the poet Hesiod around 700 BC, there was only chaos. Not chaos as disorder, but rather chaos as the primordial void, an endless emptiness without form, without substance, without anything at all. This yawning gap of nothingness existed before time, before light, before the gods themselves. From this infinite emptiness, the first divine beings gradually emerged, and these were called the protogenoi, meaning the firstborn. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. The very first to arise from chaos was Gaia, the earth. Hesiod described her as the ever-sure foundation of all. And she wasn't merely a goddess who controlled the earth. She literally was the earth itself. Solid, nurturing, and eternal. Gaia represented the physical world upon which all life would eventually stand. Alongside Gaia came Tartarus, a name for the deepest, darkest abyss that would eventually exist far beneath the surface, a place of shadow and imprisonment. And there was also Eros, not the playful cherub of later tradition, but rather a primordial force, the power of attraction, desire, and creation itself that would drive the universe forward. From within herself, Gaia brought forth Uranus, the sky, who stretched endlessly above her and enclosed the world completely. The union of Gaia, the earth, and Uranus, the sky, was the first cosmic coupling. Together, they produced 12 children of immense size and power, the Titans. These were not gods as the Greeks later understood them. The Titans were more primal, more connected to fundamental forces and natural phenomena. The 12 Titans consisted of 6 brothers and 6 sisters. The male Titans were Oceanus, Coeus, Crius, Hyperion, Iapetus, and Cronus. Oceanus embodied the great river that Greeks believed encircled the entire world, the source of all waters. Hyperion was associated with light itself, with the brilliance of the sun and the illumination of the heavens. Iapetus would become important as the father of Prometheus and Atlas, names that would echo through many later myths. Coeus and Crius are less well documented, though Coeus was sometimes associated with intellect and questioning. And then there was Cronus, the youngest of the male Titans, who would play the most significant role in what was to come. The 6 female Titans were Theia, Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, Phoebe, and Tethys. Each had her own domain and significance. Theia represented divine light and shining. Rhea would become especially important as the mother figure, the nurturer. Themis embodied divine law, order, and justice, the proper functioning of the cosmos. Mnemosyne was memory itself, personified as a goddess. In a culture that depended entirely on oral tradition, on the spoken word passed from one generation to another, memory was sacred. Phoebe was associated with prophecy and the brightness of the moon. Tethys, married to Oceanus, was the goddess of fresh water, and together with her husband she produced the river gods and the Oceanids, the nymphs of the ocean. These family connections matter deeply in Greek mythology, because the myths are fundamentally about genealogy, about lineages, succession, power passing from one generation to the next. The Titans represented cosmic forces and natural elements personified as divine beings. They were not separate from nature. They were nature itself given divine form and personality. But Uranus had other children besides the Titans. He also produced the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants of enormous strength and skill, and the Hecatoncheires, creatures with 100 hands each. These beings disturbed Uranus greatly. He feared them, perhaps because they were so different, so powerful, so strange. In his fear, Uranus imprisoned these monstrous offspring deep within Gaia, forcing them into her body, pressing them down into the depths of the earth. This caused Gaia immense pain. She suffered, bound by these imprisoned creatures within herself, unable to expel them. In her agony, she devised a plan. She forged a great sickle from adamant, a substance harder than anything else in the world, and she called upon her Titan children. She asked them, "Which of you will help me? Which of you will take this sickle and overthrow your father Uranus?" Gaia promised that whoever did this would become the ruler, the king of all the gods. Only Cronus stepped forward. Only the youngest Titan had the courage, or perhaps the ambition, to act. Cronus took the sickle from his mother's hands and hid himself, waiting in darkness. When Uranus came down to cover the earth, as he did each night, Cronus emerged from hiding. He ambushed his father and used the sickle to castrate him, severing his generative power and ending his rule in one violent act. This act of rebellion established a pattern. Power, in this mythology, did not pass peacefully from one generation to the next. It was seized violently, contested, wrested from unwilling hands. Cronus had overthrown his father just as one day this pattern suggested. He too would be overthrown. Cronus became the ruler of the cosmos, king of the Titans during what later Greeks would nostalgically call the Golden Age, a time of peace and abundance, or so the legend claimed. He married his sister Rhea, which was not unusual in divine genealogies where the pool of potential partners was quite limited. Together, Cronus and Rhea began to produce offspring who would become the next generation of gods. But Cronus carried with him a terrible fear. A prophecy had been spoken, some say by Gaia herself, some say by Uranus before his defeat, that Cronus would be overthrown by one of his own children, just as he had overthrown his father. The prophecy haunted him. It gnawed at his mind. He became obsessed with preventing it. When Rhea became pregnant with their first child, Cronus's fear drove him to a desperate action. As soon as the infant was born, a daughter named Hestia, he took the newborn from Rhea's arms and swallowed it whole. The child disappeared into his body, alive and aware, trapped inside him. Time passed. Rhea became pregnant again. Another child was born, Demeter. Again, Cronus swallowed the infant, consuming his own daughter to prevent the prophecy. Then came Hera, then Hades, then Poseidon. One by one, each child born to Rhea and Cronus was swallowed by their father, imprisoned within his body, fully conscious but unable to escape. Can you imagine the despair Rhea must have felt? To carry children, to give birth to them, only to have them torn away and consumed by her own husband. 5 times this happened. 5 times she lost a child to Cronus's paranoia and fear. The grief must have been unbearable. But when Rhea became pregnant with her 6th child, something changed. She could not bear to lose another. She went to her parents, Gaia and Uranus, and asked for their help. They devised a plan of deception. When the time came, Rhea traveled to the island of Crete, to a sacred cave on Mount Ida, or according to some versions of the story, to the Dictaean cave in a different location. There, in secret, away from Cronus's watchful eye, she gave birth to a son. This son was Zeus. To trick Cronus, Rhea wrapped a large stone in swaddling clothes, making it look exactly like a newborn infant. She returned to Cronus and presented this bundle to him, telling him their new child had been born. Cronus, not bothering to look carefully, took the stone-wrapped bundle and swallowed it whole, just as he had swallowed the others. The deception worked. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. Meanwhile, Zeus remained hidden on Crete, protected in the sacred cave. According to the myths, he was cared for by divine beings, nymphs who fed him and kept him safe, and a divine goat named Amalthea, whose milk sustained him. Some versions of the story mention the Curetes, warriors who danced and clashed their shields together, creating a loud noise that drowned out any sounds the baby might make, ensuring that Cronus, who was always listening, always fearful, never discovered that his youngest son had escaped. The 12 Titans, with Cronus at their head, ruled the cosmos during this era. Oceanus and Tethys produced the rivers and the sea nymphs. Hyperion's children, Helios the sun, Selene the moon, and Eos the dawn, brought light to the world and established the cycle of day and night. Iapetus fathered Prometheus, who would become famous for his gift of fire to humanity, and Atlas, who would bear the weight of the sky. These family lines connected all the divine beings, showing how power and domain flowed through bloodlines. Themis represented order and divine law. Mnemosyne, memory, was essential to a people who preserved their culture through oral recitation and storytelling. These titans were not mere mythological figures. They represented concepts vital to Greek understanding of the world: natural forces, abstract principles, the fundamental structure of reality itself. This entire narrative, recorded by Hesiod in his Theogony and referenced in Homer's works, formed the foundation of Greek religious thought. These stories were not believed to be literal historical events, but rather sacred narratives that explained the nature of the gods and the structure of the cosmos. They served religious and educational functions, teaching the ancient Greeks about divine power, about succession and conflict, about the eternal struggle between different forces and generations. Hesiod himself lived in Boeotia, a region of mainland Greece, probably sometime in the 8th or 7th century BC. His Theogony is one of the earliest written sources we have for Greek mythology, though the stories it contains were far older, passed down through generations of oral tradition, long before anyone thought to write them down. The Greek alphabet, adopted around 800 BC, made it possible to record these stories in permanent form, preserving them for all time. Before writing existed, these myths lived in the memories of storytellers and bards. They recited them at festivals, at religious ceremonies, at gatherings of the community. The stories evolved slightly with each telling, adapted to different regions and different audiences, which is why we sometimes find multiple versions of the same myth. But the basic framework remained: chaos, the primordial beings, the Titans, Cronus's fear and paranoia, Rhea's clever deception. The stage is now set. Zeus, the youngest child of Cronus and Rhea, sleeps safely in his hidden cave on Crete. His 5 older siblings, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, remain trapped inside their father's body, alive but imprisoned, waiting unknowingly for what is to come. The Titans rule the cosmos under Cronus's kingship, but the prophecy that haunts Cronus has not been prevented. It has only been delayed. The hidden child will grow, he will become strong, and when he does, everything will change. Zeus grew to manhood in the hidden cave on Crete, nourished by the milk of Amalthea and protected by the dancing Curetes who drowned out his cries. As he matured, his mother Rhea revealed to him the terrible truth. His father Cronus had swallowed his 5 siblings whole. They were alive, conscious, trapped inside their father's body, unable to escape. Rhea also told Zeus about the prophecy that had driven his father to madness, the prophecy that a son would overthrow him. She told him that he was that son. It fell to Zeus to save his siblings and claim his rightful place as ruler of the cosmos. Zeus first needed allies. According to the myth, he traveled to the underworld where his father had imprisoned the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires, those monstrous beings that Uranus had feared so greatly. Zeus freed them from their bondage. In gratitude, the Cyclopes, who were master craftsmen of incomparable skill, forged weapons of divine power for the Olympians. For Zeus, they created the thunderbolt, a weapon of such awesome power that it contained the fury of lightning and the force of the sky itself. For Poseidon, they forged the trident, a symbol of dominion over the seas. For Hades, they crafted the helm of invisibility, a helmet that would render the wearer unseen. The Hecatoncheires, with their 100 hands each, became fierce warriors in the coming conflict. Their strength was immense, their reach unlimited. Each of those 100 hands could hurl boulders the size of mountains. They could strike with overwhelming force from all directions simultaneously. But before the war could begin, there was one more crucial step. Zeus needed to free his siblings from inside Cronus. Some versions of the myth say that Zeus gave his father a potion that caused him to vomit. Others say that Metis, a goddess of wisdom, tricked Cronus into consuming something that would force him to regurgitate his children. Regardless of the method, the result was the same. Cronus vomited up his 5 children, one by one. First came Poseidon, then Hades, then Hera, then Demeter, and finally Hestia. They emerged fully grown and unharmed from their father's body, ready to fight. The war that followed became known as the Titanomachy, the War of the Titans. It was a cosmic conflict unlike anything that had come before, a struggle between 2 generations of divine beings for control of the entire universe. According to the myths, this war lasted for 10 full years, an eternity of battle and struggle. The Olympians, led by Zeus, established their headquarters on Mount Olympus, the highest mountain in Greece. The Titans, led by Cronus, fortified themselves on Mount Othrys, another great peak. These 2 mountains became the opposing bases of 2 great armies, and between them raged the conflict. The battles were described in apocalyptic terms. The clash of divine weapons shook the earth itself, causing earthquakes that trembled across the land. The sky darkened with the fury of combat. Thunder roared constantly as Zeus wielded his new thunderbolts. Mountains crumbled. The very foundations of the world seemed to shake. Among the Titans, not all remained loyal to Cronus. Some, recognizing that the younger gods possessed powerful weapons and allies, switched their allegiance to Zeus. Themis, the Titaness of divine law and order, sided with the Olympians, perhaps seeing that the new order was more just and stable. Prometheus, though technically a Titan, also supported Zeus, believing that the younger generation represented a better future. But most of the Titans remained loyal to Cronus, determined to maintain their rule. The most powerful of these was Atlas, a Titan of immense strength. He led the Titan forces with skill and courage, rallying his fellow Titans to stand against the Olympian assault. The Hecatoncheires proved to be the turning point in the war. Their overwhelming strength and the sheer number of their hands gave them an advantage that no single opponent could overcome. When they hurled boulders from their 100 hands, entire battalions of Titans were crushed. Their relentless assault gradually wore down the Titan resistance. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. After 10 years of bitter conflict, the Olympians finally achieved victory. The Titans, weakened and demoralized, could no longer withstand the assault. One by one, they were defeated and captured. Cronus himself was seized. The reign of the Titans came to an end. But what to do with the defeated Titans? They were too powerful to simply kill, and besides, they were divine beings who could not easily be destroyed. So the Olympians decided to imprison them. Deep beneath the earth, far below even the lowest reaches of the underworld, there existed a place called Tartarus, the deepest abyss, a prison of absolute darkness and despair. The Titans were cast into Tartarus, imprisoned in that lightless void. A great bronze gate, forged by the Cyclopes, was placed at the entrance to Tartarus, sealing it shut with locks that no mortal, and few immortals, could open. The Hecaton Chares were assigned as guards, their 100 hands making them perfect sentinels. They would watch over the imprisoned Titans for all eternity, ensuring they never escaped. Most of the Titans languished in darkness, but Cronus's fate was sometimes described differently in different sources. Some accounts say he too was imprisoned in Tartarus. Others claimed that he was sent to a blessed region called the Isles of the Blessed or Elysium, where he would eventually be honored and even revered. Still other versions suggest he was allowed to rule over a distant land beyond the boundaries of the known world. Atlas, the Titan who had led the resistance against the Olympians, received a particularly harsh punishment. Rather than being imprisoned like the others, he was condemned to stand at the western edge of the world and hold the sky upon his shoulders for all eternity. This burden would never be lifted, his punishment eternal and inescapable. With the Titans defeated and imprisoned, the Olympians now had to establish a new order. The cosmos needed to be divided, responsibilities assigned, domains established. The three most powerful of the Olympian brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, met together to decide how the world would be governed. Zeus claimed dominion over the sky and the heavens. He would be the king of gods and men, the wielder of the thunderbolt, the upholder of justice and order. His authority would extend over all the heavens and over all mortals who lived beneath the sky. Poseidon took the seas and all the waters of the world as his domain. He would rule the oceans, control the tides, command the creatures of the deep. Sailors and fishermen would appeal to him for safe passage and bountiful catches. Hades received dominion over the underworld, the realm of the dead, the place where all mortals journey after death. He would be the lord of the deceased, the ruler of the shades, the keeper of souls. It was not the most glamorous domain, and Hades was sometimes seen as less important than his brothers, but his role was absolutely essential. Death is universal. Everyone passes through Hades' realm. The other Olympian gods were assigned their own domains and responsibilities. Hera became the queen of heaven and goddess of marriage. Athena received dominion over wisdom and strategic warfare. Aphrodite became the goddess of love and beauty. Each deity had specific roles, specific responsibilities, specific realms where they held power. This division of the cosmos represented a new cosmic order. The chaos and fear that had characterized Cronus's reign, where the king lived in constant paranoia lest he be overthrown, was replaced by a more stable, though still hierarchical system. Each god knew their place, their duties, their relationship to the others. The victory of the Olympians over the Titans became a foundational myth in Greek religion. It explained why the Olympians held power, why they deserved worship, why they had legitimate authority to rule over gods and mortals alike. The myth also served to explain natural phenomena. the Hecatoncheires imprisoned in Tartarus represented the forces of chaos contained beneath the earth. The Titans represented an older, more primal order of reality that had been superseded by the newer, more sophisticated Olympian order. The Titanomachy was depicted frequently in Greek art, on vases, in sculptures, in the architectural decorations of temples. The image of fierce battle between generations of gods was compelling and meaningful to the Greeks. It represented the eternal struggle between order and chaos, between the new and the old, between different visions of how the cosmos should be organized. Some modern scholars have speculated that the Titanomachy myth may preserve distant echoes of actual historical or cultural conflicts in the Bronze Age, conflicts between different Indo-European peoples, or between older religious traditions and newer ones brought by invaders. But these are speculations based on limited evidence. What we know with certainty is that the myth served important religious and educational functions in Greek society, and that it was taken seriously as an explanation for how the current divine order came into being. The stage is now set. The Olympians rule from Mount Olympus. The Titans are imprisoned far below in Tartarus. Zeus sits as king of gods and men, his thunderbolt a symbol of his authority. His siblings, Poseidon and Hades, rule their own domains. The other Olympians take their places in the divine hierarchy. The cosmos has been reorganized, order has been established, and the age of the Titans has ended. The age of the Olympians has begun, and it will last for all of human history and beyond, or so the Greeks believed. In the aftermath of the Titanomachy, with the Titans imprisoned and the cosmos reorganized, Zeus established himself as the supreme ruler of the divine realm and the human world alike. He was called many things by the ancient Greeks: Zeus Basileus, Zeus the king, Zeus Beta, Zeus the father, Zeus Soter, Zeus the savior. But the title most commonly used was simply Zeus Olympios, Zeus of Olympus, identifying him with a great mountain that served as the divine palace. Zeus's primary domain was the sky itself. He was the god of the heavens, the god of weather, the god of storms. When dark clouds gathered on the horizon, when the thunder rumbled across the landscape, when lightning split the sky in brilliant flashes, this was Zeus at work. The ancient Greeks understood weather not as impersonal natural phenomena, but as the direct expression of divine will. When lightning struck a tree or a building, it was seen as a message from Zeus, a sign of his attention and his judgment. The thunderbolt was Zeus's most characteristic weapon and symbol. According to mythology, the Cyclopes had forged it for him during the Titanomachy, and it contained within it the raw power of lightning and the fury of the storm. The thunderbolt was depicted constantly in Greek art, held in Zeus's hand, sometimes with an eagle perched nearby, sometimes surrounded by smaller bolts. The thunderbolt represented divine authority, divine power, and divine judgment. Associated with Zeus was the eagle, the king of birds. The eagle was considered sacred to him, his bird, his messenger in the world of mortals. In Greek art, Zeus is frequently depicted with an eagle either in his hand, on his shoulder, or soaring nearby. The eagle symbolized power, dominion, the ability to see from great heights, the ability to swoop down and strike swiftly. Eagles were sacrificed to Zeus in religious rituals. Priests would kill eagles and burn parts of them as offerings, understanding that the eagle was sacred to the god, and therefore an appropriate gift. But the eagle was not Zeus's only sacred animal. The bull also belonged to him. In fact, some of the most famous myths involving Zeus center on his transformation into a bull. According to one, well-known story, Zeus saw a beautiful woman named Europa and became so enamored with her that he transformed himself into a white bull, magnificent, gleaming, irresistible. Europa, charmed by the beautiful creature, climbed onto its back, and Zeus immediately carried her away across the sea to the island of Crete. This abduction of Europa became one of the most famous episodes in Greek mythology, and the continent of Europe was said to be named after her. Transformation was one of Zeus's characteristic abilities. According to the myths, he could change his form at will. He transformed into a bull to seduce Europa. He transformed into a swan to seduce Leda. He transformed into a shower of gold to seduce Danae, a mortal woman locked away in a bronze tower by her father. He transformed into various animals and humans depending on his purpose, sometimes to seduce a woman he desired, sometimes to escape the jealous wrath of Hera, sometimes to accomplish some task that required him to move through the world in disguise. These transformations were not mere tricks or games. They reflected something fundamental about Zeus's nature, his ability to transcend normal boundaries, to move between different forms and states of being, to accomplish his will through whatever means necessary. The myths about his transformations were taken seriously in Greek religion. They explained how a god could interact with the mortal world, how divine and human could come into contact. Zeus was called Father of Gods and Men. This title summarized his role in the cosmos. He was the father of many of the other Olympian gods: Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Hermes, Dionysus, and many others were his children. He was also the father of countless demigods and heroes who populated Greek mythology, and more broadly, he was the father figure of the cosmos itself, the one who maintained order, who upheld justice, who ensured that the universe functioned according to divine law. His marriage to Hera was politically significant in the mythology. Hera was a titaness in her own right, a powerful goddess who had sided with Zeus during the war against the Titans. Their marriage united the old and new orders, connecting the defeated Titans with the victorious Olympians through a divine union. However, the mythological accounts of their marriage describe it as troubled and contentious. Hera was frequently jealous of Zeus's many affairs, and the myths describe her taking revenge on both Zeus's lovers and his illegitimate children. And yet, Zeus's affairs were legendary and endless. Besides his marriage to Hera, Zeus had countless liaisons with goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women. From these unions came some of the most famous figures in Greek mythology. Hermes, the messenger god, was his son by Maia. Dionysus, the god of wine, was his son by a mortal woman named Semele. Perseus, the great hero, was his son by Danae. Heracles, the mightiest of all heroes, was his son by the mortal woman Alcmene. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. These relationships, these children, they filled the mythological landscape with figures who played important roles in Greek stories and Greek religion. The gods and heroes who were Zeus's offspring carried his authority and his power into the world. They represented the connection between the divine realm and the human realm, the way the gods intervened in human affairs. Zeus's role as upholder of justice was central to his identity. He was not merely a god of power and force. He was also a god of law, order, and righteous judgment. When oaths were sworn, they were sworn in Zeus's name, and violating an oath brought his wrath down upon the violator. When people committed hubris, excessive pride or transgression against the divine order, it was Zeus who punished them. This concept of Zeus as judge and upholder of justice is reflected in many myths. When mortals behaved badly, when kings became tyrants, when people violated sacred laws, Zeus intervened. Sometimes he sent heroes to punish the wicked. Sometimes he intervened directly, hurling thunderbolts or unleashing divine wrath. The message was clear. No one, god or mortal, could escape the ultimate judgment of Zeus. Oracles associated with Zeus played important roles in Greek religion. The most famous was the Oracle of Dodona in northwestern Greece, where an ancient oak tree was believed to communicate Zeus's will through the rustling of its leaves. Priests and priestesses at Dodona would interpret the sounds of the wind in the oak tree's branches, understanding them as messages from Zeus. People traveled from across Greece to consult this oracle, seeking guidance about important decisions. Another famous oracle associated with Zeus was at Olympia, where his great temple stood. The oracle here was consulted for matters of particular importance, and the sanctuary at Olympia became one of the most sacred and visited sites in all of Greece. At Delphi, the primary oracle was dedicated to Apollo, but Zeus had connections there as well. According to one legend, Zeus once wanted to find the center of the world, the point that was equidistant from all edges of the earth. So he released 2 eagles, one from the eastern edge and one from the western edge, and they flew toward each other. Where they met would be the center. The eagles met at Delphi, and Zeus marked the spot with a sacred stone called the Omphalos, the navel of the world. This stone was displayed in the temple of Apollo at Delphi, and pilgrims would come to touch it, to feel their connection to the center of the cosmos. Mount Olympus itself was understood not merely as a physical mountain, but as a realm, a divine space where the gods dwelt in their palaces. It was simultaneously a real mountain that could be climbed. At 2,917 meters, Greece's highest peak, and a mythical realm that existed on a different plane of reality from the human world. The gods lived there in eternal splendor, feasting on ambrosia and nectar, celebrating their immortality, and governing the cosmos from their divine halls. Zeus's palace on Olympus was the grandest of all, befitting his status as king of gods. It was described in the myths as an enormous structure of gold and marble, with vast halls where assemblies of gods could gather. The other Olympian gods had their own palaces nearby: Hera's, Poseidon's, Athena's, Apollo's, and so on, creating a divine community on the mountain. The relationship between the mythological Mount Olympus and the actual mountain in Greece was complex. The real mountain existed, and still exists, visible to anyone traveling through northern Greece. But for the ancient Greeks, the mythical Olympus and the physical mountain were not entirely separate. The mountain was sacred precisely because it was understood as the earthly manifestation of the divine realm. Religious pilgrims traveled there. Sanctuaries were established on its slopes. Votive offerings were left at altars built on the mountain. Zeus's worship was widespread throughout Greece, and his temples were among the most important religious structures. The most famous was the Temple of Olympian Zeus in Athens, begun in the 6th century BC and completed in the 2nd century AD. This temple housed a chryselephantine statue, a statue made of gold and ivory that depicted Zeus seated on a throne. The statue was enormous, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and seeing it was considered a profound religious experience. Sacrifices to Zeus were common in Greek religious practice. Animals, typically oxen, sheep, or goats, would be led to an altar dedicated to Zeus. The animal would be killed, certain portions burned as offerings to the god, and the remaining meat would be shared among the people present, creating a ritual meal that was both religious observance and social gathering. These sacrificial practices maintained the relationship between mortals and the divine, showing respect for Zeus's power and authority. Zeus was thus not merely a god to be worshipped abstractly. He was present in the world, in the storm clouds, in the thunder, in the lightning. He was involved in human affairs, fathering children, judging behavior, punishing transgressions, rewarding virtue. He was complex, sometimes benevolent, sometimes terrible, always powerful. He represented the highest ideals of justice and order, but he was also capable of deception, seduction, and wrath. This complexity made Zeus the most important figure in Greek mythology and religion. He was not a distant, abstract principle, but a living, active force in the cosmos. Every aspect of Zeus, his symbols, his relationships, his transformations, his judgments, reflected something essential about how the ancient Greeks understood the divine and its relationship to the human world. While Zeus ruled the sky and served as king of all the gods, his three siblings each held dominion over their own vast realms. Together, the three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, controlled the major divisions of the cosmos. But before we speak of Poseidon and Hades, we must first speak of Hera. For though she did not rule a physical realm as her brothers did, she held tremendous power and influence in the divine hierarchy. Hera was the queen of heaven, the queen of the gods, and the goddess of marriage and women. She was the wife of Zeus, though their marriage was tumultuous and filled with conflict. Her worship was widespread throughout Greece, with major temples and cults dedicated to her in cities like Argos, where an enormous temple housed a massive gold and ivory statue of her. In Olympia, where a separate temple honored her alongside Zeus. In Samos, where an ancient sanctuary drew pilgrims from across the Mediterranean. In Sparta and Mycenae, where her worship was particularly important to local identity. The peacock was Hera's sacred animal, and it became her most recognizable symbol. In Greek art, Hera is frequently depicted with peacocks nearby, sometimes riding in a chariot drawn by them. The peacock's elaborate tail feathers, with their distinctive eye-like markings, were understood as representing Hera's all-seeing nature, her awareness of all that happened in heaven and on earth. The cow was also sacred to Hera, representing fertility and motherhood. In some myths, Hera was called the cow-eyed goddess, a poetic description emphasizing her connection to this animal. And then there was the cuckoo. In one famous myth, Zeus wished to seduce Hera, but she resisted his advances. So Zeus transformed himself into a cuckoo bird, a small, harmless-looking creature, and allowed himself to appear cold and wet, as if he had been flying in a storm. Hera, feeling pity for the poor bird, brought it inside to warm it. Once close to her, Zeus revealed his true form and seduced her. From that point forward, the cuckoo became associated with Hera, a reminder of how even the queen of the gods could be deceived. Hera was known for her jealousy and her vengeful nature. Zeus's countless affairs and illegitimate children enraged her. She took revenge not only on Zeus's lovers, but on their offspring as well. Heracles, Zeus's son by a mortal woman, was tormented by Hera throughout his life. She sent snakes to kill him in his cradle as an infant. She drove him mad, causing him to kill his own family in a fit of insanity. She pursued him relentlessly, making his life a series of trials and tribulations. Yet Hera also served important religious functions in Greek society. She was the protector of marriage and the family. Women in particular looked to Hera for guidance and protection. The Heraia, a festival held in honor of Hera, featured athletic competitions for women, unusual in a society where most athletic competitions excluded women. This festival emphasized Hera's special role in protecting and honoring women. If Hera represented the bonds of marriage and family, then Poseidon represented the untamed power of nature, specifically the vast and dangerous seas. Poseidon was the god of the ocean, of earthquakes, and of horses. He was worshipped especially in coastal cities, where sailors and fishermen depended on his goodwill for safe passage and successful catches. Before embarking on sea voyages, Greeks would make offerings to Poseidon, begging for his protection and favor. Poseidon's primary symbol was the trident, a three-pronged spear that served as both his weapon and his emblem of authority. In Greek art, Poseidon is almost always depicted carrying the trident. When he struck the earth with it, earthquakes would result. When he stirred the seas with it, waves and storms would arise. The trident represented his power to disturb and disrupt, to shake the foundations of the earth and stir up the depths of the ocean. Temples and sanctuaries dedicated to Poseidon have been discovered throughout Greece, especially in coastal regions. Archaeological evidence shows that his cult was ancient and widespread, with worshippers making offerings and performing sacrifices to seek his favor. According to mythology, Poseidon once competed with Athena for dominion over the city of Athens. Both gods offered gifts to the city to prove their worthiness. Athena offered the olive tree, a gift that would provide food, oil, and wood for centuries. Poseidon struck the earth with his trident and produced a salt spring, impressive but ultimately less useful. The Athenians chose Athena's gift, and Athens became associated with her rather than Poseidon. However, Poseidon's importance was not diminished by this. He remained one of the most powerful and widely worshipped gods in Greece. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. Where Poseidon ruled the seas, Hades ruled the underworld. Hades was Zeus and Poseidon's brother, and he had been swallowed by Cronus, along with his siblings when he was born. He was freed during the Titanomachy and received the underworld as his domain in the division of the cosmos. Hades was the lord of the dead, the god of the underworld, the ruler of all souls that passed from the living world. Unlike many of the other Olympian gods, Hades was rarely depicted as an active intervener in human affairs. He was more remote, more distant, more focused on his specific domain. He was not a god to be feared in the way that Ares or Athena might be feared in battle, but he was universally respected and acknowledged, because every mortal knew that they would eventually enter his realm. Hades was associated with wealth, particularly the wealth hidden beneath the earth, precious metals, gems, fertile soil. In this sense, he was sometimes called Pluto or Plutus, meaning the wealthy one. Though his domain was death and the underworld, he was not purely a god of death. He represented the hidden abundance beneath the surface of the world. The most famous object associated with Hades was the Helm of Invisibility, the helmet forged by the Cyclopes during the Titanomachy. This helmet made the wearer invisible to all eyes. According to the myths, Hades used this helmet to move through the world unseen, appearing and disappearing as he pleased. The helmet became a symbol of Hades' power to hide, to conceal, to make things vanish. Unlike other major gods, Hades had surprisingly few temples dedicated to him. Ancient writer Pausanias, who traveled through Greece in the 2nd century AD, mentioned a temple dedicated to Hades in the city of Elis in western Greece. This was noted as being particularly unusual because temples to Hades were so rare. Most worship of Hades took place in private homes or in connection with burial rites and funerary practices, rather than in grand public temples. The most famous myth involving Hades concerns his abduction of Persephone, a goddess and the daughter of Demeter, goddess of agriculture and the harvest. According to the myth, Persephone was gathering flowers in a meadow when the earth suddenly opened beneath her feet. Hades emerged from the underworld and seized her, carrying her back to his dark kingdom to be his wife and queen of the underworld. Demeter's grief at the loss of her daughter was so profound that she caused the earth to become barren. Crops stopped growing, plants stopped blooming, the world fell into winter and death. The gods, seeing the world dying, forced Hades to return Persephone to her mother. But because Persephone had eaten pomegranate seeds in the underworld, seeds that bound her to that realm, a compromise was reached. Persephone would spend part of the year with her mother in the upper world, during which time spring and summer would flourish. But she would spend part of the year with Hades in the underworld, during which time winter and autumn would prevail. This myth was central to the Eleusinian Mysteries, one of the most important mystery religions in ancient Greece. The Eleusinian Mysteries promised initiates a blessed afterlife, and the myth of Persephone's descent and return formed the theological core of these mystery teachings. Archaeological evidence from Eleusis, near Athens, confirms that this sanctuary was one of the most important and long-lasting religious centers in all of Greece, with remains dating back thousands of years. The relationship between Hades and Demeter, though expressed through the myth of abduction, reflected an important spiritual and religious understanding. Hades represented death, the descent into darkness and the underworld. Demeter represented life, growth, fertility, the abundance of the earth. Together, they represented the cycle of life and death, of growth and decay, of spring and winter. Without death, life has no meaning. Without life, death is irrelevant. The two are interconnected, and this interconnection was central to Greek religious understanding. Hades himself was sometimes depicted as not entirely evil or malevolent, despite his domain being the underworld. In some accounts, he treated Persephone well, loved her, honored her as his queen. He was portrayed as ruling his realm fairly and justly, ensuring that the dead were treated according to their deserts, the virtuous in blessed regions, the wicked in tormented places. The three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, thus divided the cosmos among themselves. Zeus ruled the sky and the heavens, wielding the thunderbolt, maintaining justice and order, governing gods and mortals. Poseidon ruled the seas and the waters, commanding earthquakes and storms, protecting sailors and fishermen. Hades ruled the underworld and the dead, maintaining the realm of the departed, ensuring that all souls found their proper place in death. Together, they represented the fundamental divisions of existence itself: the sky above, where Zeus dwelt, and where all mortals could see the divine through weather and natural phenomena; the sea below the sky, where Poseidon held sway, and where mortals could observe divine power through storms and waves; and the underworld beneath even the sea, where Hades ruled in darkness, the inevitable destination of all living things. Their dominions were not equal in glory or visibility. Zeus's realm in the sky was the most prominent, the most accessible to mortal observation. Poseidon's realm in the seas was vast and powerful, though many mortals never ventured far from shore. Hades' realm in the underworld was invisible, unseen, but universal. Every mortal would eventually enter his domain, yet each brother understood his role accepted his responsibilities, and ruled his realm according to the divine law established after their victory over the Titans. Among all the Olympian gods, few pairs were as important or as beloved as Apollo and Artemis, the divine twins born to Zeus, and the Titaness Leto. Their birth itself was fraught with drama and danger. Hera, jealous of Zeus's affair with Leto, pursued the pregnant goddess relentlessly across the earth, preventing her from finding a safe place to give birth. Eventually, Leto found refuge on the island of Delos, a small and rocky place that seemed insignificant enough that even Hera might overlook it. There, on Delos, Artemis was born first, and she immediately helped her mother deliver her twin brother, Apollo. From their very first moments, the twins were connected, dependent on each other, bound by the intimacy of shared birth. Apollo emerged as one of the most widely worshipped gods in all of Greece. He was the god of prophecy, of music, of poetry, of healing, of the sun. His domains were vast and diverse, reflecting the complexity of his character. Unlike the violent Ares, who represented the brutality and chaos of warfare, Apollo represented order, harmony, beauty, and civilized society. He was a god of culture, of the arts, of the refinement that distinguished civilized people from barbarians. Apollo's most famous sanctuary was at Delphi, located on the southwestern slopes of Mount Parnassus in central Greece. Delphi became the religious center of the entire Greek world, a place where people from every corner of the Mediterranean came seeking divine guidance. Archaeological evidence shows that the sanctuary at Delphi developed over centuries, with the earliest structures dating to around the 8th century BC. The sanctuary grew progressively more elaborate, with temples, treasuries built by various city-states, a theatre carved into the mountainside, and athletic facilities. The Oracle of Delphi was the most famous oracle in the ancient world. At its heart was the Pythia, a priestess who served as the mouthpiece of Apollo. According to the myths, Apollo had slain a serpent or dragon named Python that guarded an earlier oracle site dedicated to Gaia and other primordial deities. After killing Python, Apollo took over the oracle, establishing his worship there and beginning to deliver prophecies through the Pythia. The Pythia would enter a trance state, possibly induced by natural gases rising from beneath the temple through fissures in the earth, gases that modern geologists have identified in the Delphi region. In this altered state, she would speak cryptic words that were interpreted by priests and delivered to the person consulting the oracle. These prophecies influenced major decisions. Wars were declared or avoided based on Delphi's pronouncements. Colonies were founded in distant lands because the oracle approved. Leaders sought guidance on crucial matters affecting their cities and their people. Thousands of oracular statements from Delphi survive in inscriptions found at the site and recorded by ancient historians. Many of these prophecies show remarkable accuracy. They were vague enough to accommodate multiple interpretations, yet specific enough to seem meaningful. This combination of vagueness and apparent accuracy is one reason the Oracle of Delphi maintained its authority and influence for over 1,000 years. The Temple of Apollo at Delphi was reconstructed multiple times over the centuries, with major building campaigns occurring in the 6th century BC and again in the 4th century BC. The temple housed a sacred inner chamber, the Adyton, where the Pythia would sit and enter her trance. The entire complex, temple, theatre, stadium, treasuries, and various monuments represented one of the most elaborate and sacred complexes in the Greek world. According to Greek belief, Delphi was the center of the world, the omphalos or navel of the earth. The myth explained this by recounting how Zeus released 2 eagles one from the eastern edge of the world and one from the western edge. The eagles flew toward each other, and where they met, at Delphi, marked the exact center. To commemorate this spot, a sacred stone called the Omphalos was placed in the temple of Apollo. Pilgrims would come to touch this stone, to feel their connection to the center of the cosmos. Apollo's sacred animals reflected his various domains and characteristics. The snake or serpent was sacred to him, a reminder of his slaying of Python. Serpents were sometimes kept at Delphi, and the snake became a symbol of Apollo's power to know hidden things, to access wisdom from the depths of the earth. The swan was also sacred to Apollo, associated with music and poetry. According to mythology, the swan was a bird of prophecy and inspiration, and its song was believed to contain divine truth. Apollo was sometimes depicted with swans, and swans were sacrificed to him in religious rituals. The cicada was another creature sacred to Apollo. In Greek thought, the cicada represented longevity and eternal life, having emerged from the earth and transformed. The cicada's song, heard during the heat of summer, was understood as a kind of music, connecting the insect to Apollo's domain as god of music. If Apollo represented culture, civilization, prophecy, and order, then his twin sister Artemis represented wilderness, nature, the hunt, and independence. Artemis was a virgin goddess. She took a vow never to marry, never to bear children, dedicating herself entirely to her role as huntress and protector. Artemis was the goddess of the hunt, and she was depicted carrying a bow and arrows, often accompanied by hunting dogs or deer. She was a fierce huntress, swift and accurate, pursuing her prey through forests and mountains. In art, she is frequently shown in hunting scenes, sometimes with her followers, the nymphs, who served as her hunting companions. But Artemis had another important role. She was the protector of young girls and women. She was invoked during childbirth, called upon to ease the pain and protect both mother and child. Young girls in Athens would dedicate their toys and clothing to Artemis at a sanctuary before marriage, symbolizing their transition from girlhood to womanhood. The deer was Artemis's most sacred animal, representing grace, swiftness, and the beauty of nature. In myths, she is often surrounded by deer, sometimes riding in a chariot drawn by them. The wild boar was also sacred to her, representing the dangerous and untamed aspects of the wilderness. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. The relationship between Apollo and Artemis was close and intimate. They were born together. They shared divine parentage, and they complemented each other in their domains. Apollo represented the civilized world, prophecy, music, order, the domain of civilization and human achievement. Artemis represented the wilderness, the hunt, nature, independence, the domain of untamed nature and primal forces. Together, they represented the full spectrum of Greek life and experience. The city and the wilderness, culture and nature, prophecy and instinct, masculine order and feminine independence. Neither was subordinate to the other. They were equals, twins bound by blood and divine purpose. Apollo's worship was widespread throughout Greece, with major temples and sanctuaries dedicated to him in many cities. The temple of Apollo Epicurus at Bacsae in the Peloponnese is one of the most perfectly preserved Greek temples from antiquity. Apollo sanctuaries also existed in Corinth, Athens, and countless other locations. Artemis similarly had sanctuaries throughout Greece. Major cult centers existed at Brauron in Attica and on the island of Delos. where she shared worship with her twin brother Apollo. At these sanctuaries, young girls participated in rituals and ceremonies honoring the goddess. Archaeological excavations at Delphi have revealed the material evidence of Apollo's worship over centuries. Votive offerings, small statues, plaques, coins, left by pilgrims seeking the oracle's guidance, have been discovered in enormous quantities. Inscriptions record the questions asked and the answers given. Architectural remains show the temples that house the oracle and the treasuries built by various Greek city-states. The entire archaeological record confirms the historical reality of Delphi's importance and Apollo's centrality to Greek religion. Both Apollo and Artemis appear frequently in Homer's epics and in the works of other ancient writers. Homer refers to them as the two archers, emphasizing their connection and their shared skill with the bow. The twins represented something essential in Greek thought: the balance between opposites, the coexistence of complementary forces. Apollo and Artemis were not enemies, but partners, each complete in their own domain, yet forming a unified whole when considered together. This concept of balanced opposites, masculine and feminine, civilization and wilderness, prophecy and instinct, was central to Greek philosophy and worldview. Apollo and Artemis were also among the oldest gods in Greek religion, suggesting that their worship predated the classical period. Archaeological evidence supports the antiquity of their cults, with temple remains and votive offerings dating back centuries. The divine twins thus represent critical aspects of ancient Greek religion and culture. Apollo embodies the achievements of civilization: prophecy, music, poetry, order, beauty. Artemis embodies the freedom and power of nature, the hunt, the wilderness, the independence of those who reject conventional bonds. Together, they encompass the full range of human experience and the natural world, representing both what humans could achieve through culture and what remained eternally wild and free beyond human control. Beyond Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Apollo, and Artemis, the Olympian pantheon included 6 more major deities, each with specific domains, sacred symbols, and devoted followers. These gods and goddesses completed the 12 Olympians, the core group of divine beings who ruled the cosmos and demanded worship from mortals. Athena was the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. Unlike Ares, who represented the brutal, chaotic aspects of warfare, Athena embodied the intelligent, strategic planning that led to victory. She was also the goddess of craftsmanship, of skilled labor, of the arts and sciences. She was one of only 3 virgin goddesses in the Olympian pantheon, having taken a vow never to marry or bear children, dedicating herself entirely to wisdom and her role as protector of cities. Athena's worship was especially central to Athens, the city that bore her name. The magnificent Parthenon temple on the Acropolis was dedicated to her and served as the religious and civic center of the city. Constructed between 447 and 432 BCE under the leadership of Pericles, the Parthenon was one of the greatest achievements of Greek architecture. Its interior housed the Athena Parthenos, a chryselephantine statue made of gold and ivory, created by the renowned sculptor Phidias. The statue was enormous, towering about 13 meters tall, richly adorned with precious materials and decorated with mythological scenes. Seeing this statue was considered a profound religious experience. The Panathenaia was an annual festival held in honor of Athena. It featured religious ceremonies, athletic competitions, and a grand procession that culminated at the Parthenon. During the festival, a new peplos robe, woven by selected women, would be presented to Athena's statue in the temple. This robe had been specially prepared and blessed, and its presentation was the culmination of the festival. The Panathenaia was one of the most important civic and religious events in Athens, reinforcing both religious devotion and civic unity. According to mythology, Athena was born in an unusual way. She sprang fully grown and fully armored from the head of Zeus after he swallowed her mother, Metis, a goddess of wisdom. This birth story symbolized Athena's emergence from pure intellect and wisdom. She was wisdom made manifest, appearing complete and ready for action. Though mythological, this birth story was taken seriously in Greek religion and art, and countless depictions show Athena in armor, emphasizing her role as a warrior goddess of strategic intelligence. In mythology, Athena competed with Poseidon for dominion over the city of Athens. Both gods offered gifts to prove their worthiness to protect the city. Poseidon struck the earth with his trident and produced a salt spring, impressive but ultimately less useful for a city's survival. Athena offered the olive tree, a gift that would provide food, oil for lamps, and wood for construction for generations. The Athenians chose Athena's gift, and the olive tree became sacred to the city. An ancient olive tree was said to grow on the Acropolis itself, planted by Athena as a sign of her victory. If Athena represented wisdom and strategic power, then Aphrodite represented beauty, love, and desire. Aphrodite's origin story was unique among the Olympians. According to Hesiod, she was born from sea foam that arose when Uranus was castrated and his severed genitals fell into the sea. She emerged from the waves fully formed and beautiful, stepping onto the shore on a giant scallop shell. This origin made her, in a sense, the eldest of the Olympians, older than Zeus himself, since she predated the Titanomachy and the establishment of the Olympian order. Aphrodite was the goddess of beauty, love, desire, and sexuality. She was worshipped throughout the Mediterranean world, with major temples and sanctuaries in Cyprus, where she was said to have emerged from the sea, in Corinth, where a famous temple drew pilgrims, and in many other cities. Archaeological sites confirm the widespread veneration of Aphrodite and the antiquity of her worship. In mythology, Aphrodite was involved in numerous romantic and sexual adventures. She had affairs with gods and mortals alike, producing children who became important figures in later myths. Her most famous myth involved the Trojan War, the abduction of Helen and the beauty contest among the goddesses that led to Paris's judgment and ultimately to the Great War. Hephaestus was the god of fire, metalworking, and craftsmanship. He was the divine smith, the creator of wondrous objects. According to mythology, Hephaestus forged the thunderbolts of Zeus, the trident of Poseidon, and the helm of invisibility for Hades. He created armor and weapons for gods and heroes. He was associated with all forms of craftsmanship and skilled labor. Hephaestus was worshipped in cities known for metalworking and craftsmanship. Archaeological evidence shows temples and sanctuaries dedicated to him in Athens and on the island of Lemnos, which was particularly sacred to him. Artisans and craftsmen would appeal to Hephaestus for skill and success in their work. The sacred animals of Hephaestus included the donkey, representing hard labor and patience, the dog representing loyalty and watchfulness, and the crane representing vigilance and hard work. These animals reflected the values associated with craftsmanship: patience, dedication, and careful attention to detail. According to some traditions, Hephaestus's primary temple or workshop was located on Mount Etna in Sicily, where volcanic fires burned eternally. The volcanic activity was understood as Hephaestus, working at his forge, creating divine objects. The association between Hephaestus and volcanic fire was ancient and widespread. Demeter was the goddess of agriculture, the harvest, and grain. She was one of the most important goddesses in Greek religion, because agriculture was the foundation of Greek civilization and survival. A failed harvest meant starvation. A good harvest meant abundance and prosperity. Demeter held the power of life and death over entire populations. Demeter's most famous myth involved her daughter Persephone and her relationship with Hades, the lord of the underworld. When Persephone was abducted and taken to the underworld, Demeter's grief caused the earth to become barren. The resulting compromise that Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld and part with her mother explained the seasons. When Persephone was underground with Hades, Demeter grieved and the land lay dormant. When Persephone returned, Demeter's joy brought spring and summer. The cult of Demeter was central to the Eleusinian mysteries, one of the most important mystery religions in ancient Greece. The Eleusinian mysteries promised initiates a blessed afterlife, and the myth of Persephone's cycle formed the theological foundation of these teachings. Archaeological evidence from Eleusis confirms the importance and longevity of Demeter's cult. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. The sacred animals of Demeter included the serpent, representing fertility and regeneration, the pig, representing abundance and sacrifice, and the gecko, representing watchfulness over the earth. These animals reflected Demeter's connection to the fertility of the land and the cycles of nature. The Thesmophoria was a festival held in honor of Demeter. Unusually for Greek religious festivals, the Thesmophoria was restricted to women. Men were not permitted to attend. The festival involved rituals and ceremonies that were kept secret, and even today we do not fully understand all the details of what occurred. However, inscriptions and references in Greek literature confirm that the Thesmophoria was an important and long-established festival. Hermes was the messenger god, the god of trade, communication, and thieves. He carried the caduceus, a staff with two intertwined serpents, symbolizing his role as a mediator between different worlds and states of being. Hermes was swift and cunning, able to move between the divine and mortal realms, between the upper world and the underworld. He was the psychopomp, the guide of souls to the underworld. Hermes was worshipped widely throughout Greece, and small shrines called Hermae, stone pillars topped with a head of Hermes, were erected at boundaries, crossroads, and entrances to cities. These served as protective markers and places where travelers could make offerings. Ares was the god of war, but unlike Athena, who represented strategic warfare, Ares represented the brutal, chaotic, violent aspects of combat. He was depicted as bloodthirsty, cruel, and unpredictable. Though necessary in a warrior society, Ares was not particularly beloved or admired. He was often depicted as a bully and a coward. Ares was worshipped primarily in Thrace, in northern Greece, a region known for its warriors and martial culture. His worship was less prominent in other parts of Greece, reflecting the ambivalent attitude many Greeks had toward him. Hestia was the goddess of the hearth, the home, and the family. She was one of the original Olympians, having been swallowed by Cronus and then freed during the Titanomachy. Yet despite her ancient lineage, she was the quietest and least visible of the Olympians. She had no temples, no public cults, no major festivals dedicated to her. Instead, she was honored in every home, at every family meal, through the fire of the hearth, At the beginning of every meal, a portion was thrown into the fire as an offering to Hestia. Every family had a hearth, and every hearth was sacred to Hestia. In this way, she was simultaneously the most universally worshipped goddess and the one least visible in public religious life. Dionysus was the god of wine, theatre, ecstasy, and transformation. He was associated with fertility, with the grape harvest, with the fermentation of wine. His worship involved ritual intoxication and ecstatic experiences. Dionysus was unique among the Olympians in that he was born of a mortal mother, Semele, and a divine father, Zeus. This made him half mortal, half divine, a mediator between human and divine realms. The worship of Dionysus involved festivals like the Dionysia, which included dramatic performances, plays and comedies. In fact, Greek theatre as we know it developed from Dionysian festivals. The god's worship could be ecstatic and even violent, involving frenzied dancing and altered states of consciousness. Women followers of Dionysus, called Maenads, were depicted in art and literature as wild, frenzied, powerful. Together, these 12 Olympians, Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Hephaestus, Aphrodite, Hermes, and Dionysus, represented the complete pantheon of major Greek gods. Each had specific domains, specific symbols, specific sacred animals and plants. Each was worshipped in particular ways and at particular times. Yet they were unified in their divinity, their immortality, their power over mortals and over nature. The Olympian system was remarkably stable. From the classical period, through the Hellenistic age, and into the Roman period, these 12 deities remained central to Greek religion. Though individual gods rose and fell in popularity depending on local and historical circumstances, the basic structure of the Olympian pantheon remained constant. This pantheon represented a complete cosmology, a way of understanding the divine forces that govern the universe. Each god represented specific aspects of human experience and natural phenomena. Together, they provided a comprehensive framework for understanding the relationship between mortals and the divine, between human society and the natural world. With the 12 Olympians established in their domains and the cosmos ordered according to divine law, the age of heroes began. These were mortals, or sometimes half-mortals, children of gods and humans, who performed extraordinary deeds, undertook dangerous quests, and faced monsters and challenges that would have destroyed ordinary people. Their stories were told and retold, passed down through generations, becoming the foundation of Greek cultural identity and moral teaching. One of the most famous heroes was Perseus, whose story began with danger before his birth. His grandfather, King Acrisius of Argos, received a prophecy that his grandson would kill him. In fear, Acrisius locked his daughter Danae away in a bronze tower, guarding her carefully so she could never bear a child. But Zeus, determined to reach the maiden, transformed himself into a shower of gold and descended through the tower's roof, seducing Danae. From this union, Perseus was born. When Acrisius discovered the child, he placed Perseus and his mother in a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, hoping they would drown. But the chest drifted to the island of Seriphos, where it was discovered by a fisherman who raised Perseus as his own son. As a young man, Perseus was sent on what seemed an impossible task, to bring back the head of Medusa, one of the Gorgons. Medusa was a terrible creature, a woman with snakes for hair whose gaze could turn anyone who looked upon her to stone. According to the myth, merely looking at her face meant instant death, transformation into solid rock, frozen forever in whatever expression was on your face at the moment of death. With help from Athena and Hermes, Perseus was given special equipment for the task. He received an adamantine sickle, an unbreakable curved blade made of the hardest substance in existence. He was given winged sandals that allowed him to fly. He received a special shield from Athena that could reflect Medusa's deadly gaze back upon her, protecting him from her power. Using these gifts, Perseus flew to the end of the world where the Gorgons dwelt. He found Medusa sleeping, and using his polished shield as a mirror, he could see her reflection without meeting her gaze directly. Using the adamantine sickle, he beheaded her, and from her severed neck sprang two beings, Pegasus, a magnificent winged horse, and Chrysa, a giant with a golden sword. Perseus placed Medusa's head in a special pouch, a gift from Athena. The head retained its power even in death. Anyone who looked upon it would still be turned to stone. This made it a powerful weapon and talisman. According to the myths, Perseus used Medusa's head to turn his enemies to stone, protecting himself and those he cared for. On his way home, Perseus came upon a princess named Andromeda, chained to a rock as a sacrifice to a sea monster. Her mother had boasted that Andromeda was more beautiful than the Nereids, sea nymphs, and this had angered Poseidon, who sent a terrible monster to ravage the kingdom. The only way to stop it was to sacrifice a maiden. Andromeda was chosen. Perseus saw the maiden in distress, fell in love with her, and agreed to slay the monster if he could have her hand in marriage. Perseus fought the sea monster, using Medusa's head to turn it to stone. He freed Andromeda, and they returned to his homeland together. Eventually, the prophecy that had haunted Acrisius came true. Perseus accidentally killed his grandfather during an athletic competition, but this was fate, not malice. Another famous hero was Bellerophon, whose story involved capturing an even more wondrous creature, Pegasus, the winged horse. Bellerophon desired to capture Pegasus and use it to accomplish great deeds. According to the myths, he waited at a spring where Pegasus came to drink. Using a magical bridle given to him by Athena, he was able to catch the horse and ride it. With Pegasus as his mount, Bellerophon was able to accomplish tasks that would otherwise have been impossible. His most famous achievement was slaying the Chimera, a creature of terrifying aspect and power. The Chimera was described as having the front and head of a lion, the body of a goat, and a serpent's tail. It breathed fire and terrorized the land, killing livestock and people seemingly unstoppable. Bellerophon, mounted on Pegasus, flew above the Chimera, raining arrows and spears upon it. According to one version of the myth, he placed a piece of lead on the tip of his spear. As the Chimera breathed fire, the lead melted, pouring down the creature's throat and suffocating it. The Chimera fell dead, and Bellerophon became famous throughout the land. According to the myths, success and glory went to Bellerophon's head. He became arrogant, believing himself equal or superior to the gods. He attempted to ride Pegasus to Mount Olympus itself, to dwell with the Olympians as one of them. This was the ultimate hubris, excessive pride that violated the natural order and boundary between mortal and divine. Zeus punished Bellerophon's arrogance by sending a gadfly to sting Pegasus. The horse reared and threw Bellerophon, sending him tumbling back to earth. Bellerophon survived the fall, but was crippled and broken, wandering the earth as a wretched beggar. Pegasus itself became immortal. According to legend, it flew to Mount Olympus and was transformed into a constellation, the Pegasus constellation, that can still be seen in the night sky. The winged horse became a symbol of inspiration, of the pursuit of lofty goals, of the connection between the earthly and the divine. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. Another of the great heroes was Theseus, the hero of Athens. According to mythology, Theseus was the son of the Athenian king Aegeus and a mortal woman. He grew up in his mother's home and, upon reaching manhood, decided to travel to Athens to meet his father. Along the way, he defeated various bandits and monsters, establishing himself as a great hero. Theseus's most famous adventure involved the Minotaur, a creature that was part man and part bull. The Minotaur had been born from an unnatural union between a Cretan queen and a sacred bull, and it was imprisoned in an elaborate maze called the Labyrinth, designed by the craftsman Daedalus. The maze was so complex that anyone who entered it could never find their way out. According to the myth, Athens was forced to send a tribute to the king of Crete, 7 young men and 7 young women, to be sent into the labyrinth as food for the Minotaur. This tribute had to be paid every 9 years, a terrible burden and a symbol of Athens' subjugation to Crete. Theseus volunteered to be one of the tributes, determined to end this practice by slaying the Minotaur. When Theseus arrived in Crete, the king's daughter Ariadne fell in love with him. She gave him a ball of thread, instructing him to tie one end at the entrance to the labyrinth and unwind it as he proceeded deeper inside. This way, he could find his way back out after confronting the Minotaur. Theseus entered the labyrinth, following the thread deeper and deeper into the maze. When he encountered the Minotaur, a fierce battle ensued. According to the myths, Theseus killed the monster using his strength and courage. He then followed the thread back out of the maze, escaped Crete with Ariadne, and returned to Athens as a hero. Theseus went on to become king of Athens and was regarded as the founder hero of the city, credited with unifying the various communities of Attica under Athenian rule. He represented the ideal hero, strong, courageous, intelligent, and just. Yet another famous hero was Jason, who led the Argonauts on a quest for the Golden Fleece. According to the myth, Jason was the son of a deposed king and was raised in secret. As an adult, he claimed his rightful throne, but the king who occupied it agreed to give up the throne if Jason could bring him the Golden Fleece, a legendary treasure guarded by dragons in a distant land. Jason assembled a crew of the greatest heroes in Greece: Heracles, the mightiest of all heroes; Orpheus, the musician whose songs could charm anyone; Atalanta, the female warrior, and many others. They boarded a ship called the Argo, and thus they became known as the Argonauts. The Argonauts' journey took them across the Mediterranean, through dangerous waters, past fantastic creatures and magical obstacles. They encountered sirens whose songs could lure sailors to their deaths. They passed through the clashing rocks, massive stones that crushed anything between them. They faced giants and monsters, endured storms and hardships. Eventually, they reached the distant land where the Golden Fleece was kept. With the help of a princess named Medea, who fell in love with Jason, they obtained the fleece and began the journey home. The return voyage was equally perilous and filled with adventures. The Argonautica, an epic poem about Jason's quest, was composed by Apollonius of Rhodes in the 3rd century BCE. This poem preserves many of the details of the legend and was widely read and respected in the ancient world. The quest of the Argonauts represented the ideal of heroic adventure, a band of companions, each with their own skills and strengths, working together to achieve an impossible goal. These heroes, Perseus, Bellerophon, Theseus, and Jason, represented the ideals that Greek culture held dear. They were courageous, facing monsters and dangers that would have terrified ordinary mortals. They were intelligent, using cunning and strategy as well as strength. They were determined, pursuing their quest regardless of the obstacles. They were connected to the divine. Some were children of gods. Others received help from Olympians. Yet they remained fundamentally mortal and human. The myths of these heroes served educational purposes in Greek society. Young people learned about heroic virtues by hearing these stories. The heroes represented ideals to aspire to: courage, intelligence, perseverance, loyalty to friends. At the same time, the myths also showed the consequences of hubris, excessive pride, as exemplified by Bellerophon's failed attempt to reach Olympus. The age of heroes was understood by the Greeks as a distinct historical period, earlier than their own time, but more recent than the time of the Titans. During this heroic age, mortals and gods interacted more directly. Heroes could accomplish feats that seemed impossible, and the line between the mortal and divine realms was more permeable than it would later become. The heroes were the bridge between the age of gods and the age of ordinary mortals. Among all the heroes of Greek mythology, none was more celebrated or more widely worshipped than Heracles, known to the Romans as Hercules. Heracles was the son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Alcmene, making him a demigod, half divine, half human. From birth, Heracles was marked for greatness, but his path was filled with suffering and struggle. Hera, Zeus's wife, was jealous of Heracles because he represented her husband's infidelity. She tormented the hero throughout his life, sending trials and tribulations his way, determined to make his existence miserable. When Heracles was an infant, Hera sent 2 great serpents to his cradle to strangle him. But even as a baby, Heracles possessed superhuman strength. He strangled both snakes with his bare hands, demonstrating the power that would define his life. As an adult, Heracles committed a terrible act. In a fit of madness, possibly sent by Hera, he killed his own wife and children. Consumed with grief and guilt, he sought purification and redemption. He was told that he could achieve this by serving King Eurystheus and completing any tasks the king assigned to him. The king, hoping to destroy Heracles, assigned him 12 seemingly impossible tasks. These became known as the 12 labors of Heracles, and they are among the most famous episodes in Greek mythology. The labors included slaying the Nemean lion, a creature whose hide was impervious to any weapon, capturing the golden hind of Artemis, obtaining the girdle of the Amazon queen, capturing Cerberus, the 3-headed dog that guarded the underworld, and many others. Each labor seemed designed to kill Heracles. The Nemean lion could not be wounded by any conventional weapon, so Heracles strangled it with his bare hands and used its own claws to skin it. He then wore the lion's skin as armor, making it his distinctive trademark. The golden hind of Artemis could not be caught by force without angering the goddess, so Heracles had to use cunning and patience, chasing it for a full year before finally capturing it. Obtaining the girdle of the Amazon queen. Hippolyta seemed straightforward, but when Heracles arrived among the Amazons, a fierce battle ensued. Heracles defeated the Amazons and obtained the girdle, but only after significant struggle. Capturing Cerberus, the 3-headed guard dog of Hades, required Heracles to journey to the underworld itself. He managed to capture the beast and bring it to the surface, then returned it to Hades unharmed. Through determination, strength, courage, and sometimes cleverness, Heracles completed all 12 labors. By doing so, He achieved redemption for his past crime and established himself as the greatest hero of Greece. His fame spread throughout the Mediterranean world. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. Heracles' life ended in tragedy and transformation. According to the myths, he married again after his trials, but a jealous rival gave his wife a poisoned robe. The robe burned Heracles with unbearable pain. Faced with eternal agony, Heracles built a funeral pyre and climbed onto it, choosing to end his mortal life. But as he burned, Zeus took pity on his son and transported him to Mount Olympus. Heracles was transformed into a god, achieving immortality, one of the few mortals to do so. He became a god of strength and perseverance, worshipped throughout Greece and later throughout the Roman Empire. Heracles was unique in being worshipped by both Greeks and Romans. The Romans called him Hercules and adopted his myths into their own culture. His image appeared on coins, in sculptures, and in art throughout both the Greek and Roman worlds. He represented the triumph of strength and perseverance over impossible odds, the achievement of redemption through effort and suffering. If Heracles represented strength and perseverance, then Achilles represented martial prowess and tragic fate. Achilles was one of the greatest warriors of the Trojan War, a conflict described in Homer's Iliad. According to the myths, Achilles was the son of a sea nymph and a mortal king, making him another demigod. Achilles' mother, knowing from prophecy that her son would die young if he went to Troy, tried to hide him among the daughters of a king, disguising him as a girl. But the hero Odysseus discovered the deception and recruited Achilles for the Greek army. Achilles reluctantly agreed to join the expedition. At Troy, Achilles became the mightiest warrior on the Greek side. He fought with terrible ferocity, killing many Trojans and earning a reputation as an unstoppable force. According to the myths, he was nearly invulnerable. His mother had dipped him in the river Styx as an infant, making him immune to weapons. The only vulnerable spot was his heel, where his mother had held him. Achilles was proud and passionate, quick to anger and quick to forgive. He formed a deep bond with his companion Patroclus. When Patroclus was killed by Hector, the greatest Trojan warrior, Achilles' grief drove him to rage. He pursued Hector around the walls of Troy and killed him, dragging his body around the city in triumph. Ultimately, Achilles himself was killed when Paris, a Trojan prince, shot an arrow that struck Achilles in the heel, his one vulnerable spot. Achilles fell, dying from the wound. His death marked a turning point in the Trojan War, and his funeral was one of the most elaborate and mourned events in Greek mythology. Another famous hero was Odysseus, the king of Ithaca. Odysseus was known for his intelligence and cunning rather than his physical strength. Though he was a skilled warrior, he fought at Troy alongside Achilles and many other Greek heroes. Odysseus is famous for his role in the Trojan horse strategy. According to the myths, the Greeks had been unable to breach the walls of Troy despite 10 years of siege. Odysseus devised a plan. The Greeks would build an enormous wooden horse, hide warriors inside it, and present it as a gift to the Trojans. The Trojans, believing the Greeks had departed and left the horse as an offering, brought it within the city walls. That night, the Greek warriors emerged from the horse and opened the gates, allowing the Greek army to pour in. Troy fell. After Troy's fall, Odysseus began the journey home to his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus. This journey, which should have taken a few weeks, instead took 10 years, filled with adventures, hardships, and encounters with fantastic creatures. He faced the Cyclops Polyphemus, barely escaping with his life. He encountered the Sirens, whose beautiful songs lured sailors to their deaths. He was held captive by the nymph Calypso for 7 years. The story of Odysseus's journey home is told in Homer's Odyssey, one of the greatest works of ancient literature. The Odyssey explores themes of perseverance, loyalty, and the struggle to maintain one's identity and values in the face of overwhelming challenges. The relationship between heroes and gods was complex and varied. Some heroes were children of gods, like Heracles, Achilles, and Odysseus. Others were favored by particular gods and received divine help in their quests. Still others offended the gods and faced divine punishment. The gods were not distant or abstract, but actively involved in the lives and fates of heroes. Hera's role in hero stories was particularly significant. Because many heroes were children of Zeus by mortal women, Hera saw them as threats or embarrassments. She actively opposed them, sending monsters and trials their way, trying to prevent their success. Yet paradoxically, by opposing these heroes, she motivated them to achieve greater feats. The trials she sent them became the source of their fame and glory. Heroes served as intermediaries between the mortal and divine realms. They were stronger than ordinary mortals, capable of feats that seemed impossible, yet they were not gods. They had to live with the consequences of their actions. They grew old, suffered, and died. But they were also connected to the divine through their parentage or through the favor of the gods. They represented the possibility of mortals achieving greatness and interacting with the divine. Hero cults were a significant part of Greek religious practice. After a hero died, local communities would often establish cults in their honor. Temples or shrines would be built at the hero's tomb or birthplace. Regular offerings would be made, and annual festivals celebrated the hero's deeds and memory. The hero would be understood as a protective spirit for the community, watching over them and providing aid in times of need. Archaeological evidence confirms the existence and importance of hero worship. Excavations have revealed remains of temples and shrines dedicated to heroes. Inscriptions record the names of heroes being honored and the nature of the offerings made to them. The practice was widespread across Greece and persisted for centuries. The distinction between hero worship and god worship was sometimes blurred. Heroes who were children of gods, or who had been deified like Heracles, occupied a liminal space between mortal and divine. They were not quite gods, yet they were more than ordinary mortals. This ambiguous status reflected the Greek understanding of the relationship between the human and divine worlds. The heroic age, as the Greeks understood it, was a period when such interactions between mortals and gods were more common, when heroes could accomplish extraordinary feats, when the boundaries between the possible and the impossible were more permeable. It was contrasted with the present age, the age of the narrator, when such wonders were no longer possible. The myths of heroes served multiple purposes in Greek society. They provided entertainment and excitement. They taught moral lessons about virtue, perseverance, and the consequences of hubris. They explained the origins of cities and the relationships between different communities. They connected the past to the present, showing how the heroes of old had shaped the world the Greeks inhabited. Through the heroes, the Greeks explored fundamental questions about human nature and destiny. What does it mean to be human? What is the relationship between fate and free will? How should we respond to impossible challenges? How should we accept our mortality? The myths provided no simple answers, but offered rich material for reflection and discussion. The Trojan War stands as the most famous conflict in Greek mythology. a 10-year siege that pitted the united forces of Greece against the city of Troy. The war is immortalized in Homer's Iliad, composed around the 8th century BCE, one of the greatest epic poems ever written. The Odyssey, Homer's second epic, describes the journey home of one of the Greek survivors, Odysseus, after the war's conclusion. According to the myths, the Trojan War began because of a woman, Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. Helen was married to Menelaus, king of Sparta, but the Trojan prince Paris abducted her and carried her to Troy. Menelaus, outraged, called upon the other Greek kings to help him retrieve Helen and punish Troy. The Greeks assembled a massive army and sailed to Troy to wage war. The war lasted 10 years. The Greeks laid siege to Troy, unable to breach the city's great walls despite numerous attempts. Many heroes died on both sides. Achilles killed many Trojans before being killed himself. Hector, the greatest Trojan warrior, fell to Achilles, and countless others perished. The most famous episode of the war involved the Trojan horse. Unable to breach the walls through direct assault, the Greeks devised a cunning strategy. They built an enormous wooden horse, large enough to contain a significant number of warriors. The horse was presented to the Trojans as a gift, ostensibly an offering to the gods or a symbol of Greek surrender. According to the myths, Athena helped design and construct the wooden horse, lending her wisdom to the project. The Trojans, deceived, believed the horse was safe to bring within their walls. A Greek named Sinon, left behind to deceive the Trojans, convinced them that the horse was an offering and that bringing it inside would protect the city. One Trojan, a priest named Laocoon, suspected the deception. He warned the Trojans, famously saying, "I fear the Greeks, even bearing gifts." According to the myth, Athena and Poseidon, angered at his opposition to their plan, sent 2 massive sea serpents that attacked Laocoon and his sons, killing them. This divine punishment silenced opposition to bringing the horse inside the city. Another figure who warned against the horse was Cassandra, a priestess of Apollo. Cassandra had been given the power of prophecy by Apollo, but because she spurned his romantic advances, he cursed her so that no one would ever believe her prophecies. She warned the Trojans that the horse contained Greek warriors and that opening it would lead to Troy's destruction. But her warnings went unheeded. The Trojans brought the horse within their city walls. That night, the Greek warriors hidden inside emerged from the wooden structure. They opened the gates of Troy to the Greek army waiting outside. The city fell. Troy was sacked and burned. Most of the male population was killed, and the women and children were enslaved. The 10-year war ended in total Greek victory. Now, the question of historical truth is more complex. The city of Troy itself undoubtedly existed. It is a real archaeological site at Hisarlik in northwestern Turkey. Excavations have revealed multiple cities built atop one another, with Troy 6 and Troy 7 being the layers most often associated with the legendary war. Troy 7a shows evidence of destruction by fire, dating to around 1180 BCE. The Hittites, a contemporary Bronze Age civilization, recorded Troy under the name Wilusa in their diplomatic records. They document interactions with this city and even mention conflicts. This external historical evidence confirms that Troy was a real, politically significant city. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. However, the specific events described in Homer's Iliad have no archaeological verification. There is no evidence for the 10-year siege, no remains of Greek camps outside the city, no evidence of the specific battles and individual combats described in the epic. The legendary heroes, Achilles, Hector, Agamemnon, Paris, have left no archaeological trace. Most significantly, there is no archaeological evidence for the Trojan horse. The famous wooden horse, the central event in the fall of Troy, according to mythology, has no support in the archaeological record. Scholars have debated what historical event, if any, might have inspired the legend of the wooden horse, but no definitive answer exists. The destruction layer at Troy 7a does show signs of fire and collapse, suggesting a violent end. Whether this destruction resulted from warfare, earthquake, or internal conflict remains uncertain. We cannot definitively connect this archaeological evidence to the legendary Trojan War described in Homer. The relationship between Homer's Troy and archaeological Troy illustrates an important principle. Historical sites can be the basis for legendary narratives without those narratives being historically accurate. The Greeks knew that Troy was a real place. They incorporated it into their legendary tales, adding gods, heroes, and fantastic elements that transformed a historical siege, if a siege occurred, into epic poetry. The role of gods in the Trojan War, as described in the Iliad, is pervasive. Athena consistently favors the Greeks and opposes the Trojans. Apollo supports the Trojans. Poseidon assists the Greeks. Aphrodite protects Paris and the Trojans. These divine interventions are central to Homer's narrative, but they are purely mythological. There is no archaeological or historical evidence for divine involvement in the actual events at Troy. Homer's epics, while not historically accurate in their details, do preserve some accurate information about Bronze Age warfare, weaponry, and society. Archaeologists studying the Iliad have noted that many descriptions of warfare, armor, and social customs match what is known about the Mycenaean world from which the Greeks came. This suggests that Homer, or the tradition from which he drew, had some genuine knowledge of the Bronze Age, even though the specific events of the war are legendary. The Iliad and the Odyssey served as the primary sources for Greek understanding of the Trojan War. These epics were taught to every Greek child, memorized and quoted, revered as windows into the heroic past. For the Greeks, Homer's accounts were the authoritative version of the war's events. The war, as described in Homer's epics, served educational purposes in Greek society. It taught about heroism, honor, loyalty, and the tragic costs of conflict. Achilles' choice to pursue glory rather than a long but obscure life, Hector's noble death defending his city, Odysseus' cunning and perseverance. These narratives taught moral lessons about how one should live and face adversity. The Trojan War also served to explain and justify Greek colonization and influence throughout the Mediterranean. According to the myths, the Greeks had united to achieve a great victory over a foreign city. They had shown their power and dominance. This narrative helped explain and legitimize Greek presence and influence in regions throughout the Mediterranean world. The war's influence on Greek culture was immense and lasting. Countless Greek plays, poems, and works of art referenced the Trojan War or specific episodes from it. The tragic playwrights, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, all wrote plays set during or after the war. The war was a favorite subject for Greek artists, depicted on vases, in sculptures, and in the decorations of temples. The death of Achilles, the fate of Priam and Hecuba, the suffering of the Greek soldiers, the fate of Helen. These stories were endlessly retold and reinterpreted. Each generation of Greeks found new meanings in the ancient narratives, new lessons to draw, new ways to understand their own world through the lens of the legendary past. Later Roman writers, including Virgil in the Aeneid, incorporated the Trojan War into their own cultural narratives. Aeneas, a Trojan hero not mentioned in Homer, became the ancestor of the Romans in Virgil's telling. The Romans adopted and adapted the Greek legends, incorporating them into their own mythology and using them to explain their origins and destiny. The Trojan War represents the culmination of the heroic age in Greek mythology. It brought together the greatest heroes of Greece: Achilles, Ajax, Odysseus, Hector, and many others. It involved divine intervention and superhuman feats. It was the last great heroic conflict described in Greek mythology. After Troy's fall, the age of heroes gradually faded, and the world became more ordinary and mundane. The war also marks the transition point between mythology and history. Before Troy, the myths are purely legendary. Gods and monsters populate the stories, and there is no historical basis. The Trojan War, while legendary in its details, occurred in a place that we can identify and study archaeologically. After Troy, we gradually transition into the historical period, where we have written records and material evidence. Thus, the Trojan War stands at the boundary between the purely mythological past and the historical past. It is a legendary war about a real city, featuring heroes who may or may not have existed, involving gods whose participation cannot be verified, yet describing events that occurred in a place we can locate and study. It exemplifies how mythology and history intertwine, how real places become settings for legendary tales, and how the past is understood and transmitted through narrative. The myths of ancient Greece were not confined to the realm of pure imagination and story. They were deeply connected to real places, to the actual geography of Greece and the surrounding Mediterranean world. The Greeks saw their landscape through the lens of mythology. Mountains, springs, caves, and rivers were understood as sacred spaces intimately connected to the gods and heroes whose stories were told about them. Mount Olympus, the highest mountain in Greece, rises to a height of precisely 2,917.727 meters at its highest peak, called Mytikas. This mountain, with its snow-capped summit visible for vast distances, was the natural choice for the dwelling place of the gods. According to Greek mythology, the 12 Olympian gods lived in palaces on this mountain, ruling the cosmos from its peaks. The actual mountain is a real physical place that can be visited and climbed. Archaeological investigations have revealed votive offerings and remains of small temples and altars on the mountain slopes, particularly on peaks like Agios Antonios. These discoveries suggest that pilgrims traveled to Mount Olympus in ancient times, seeking to connect with the divine realm at the location where the gods were believed to dwell. The mountain has deep gorges and hidden valleys, and some of these natural formations were understood as the locations where the gods' palaces might be situated. The Enipeus Gorge, for instance, with its dramatic rocky formations and water sources, was considered particularly sacred. The Greeks understood these natural features as manifestations of the divine realm, places where the boundary between the mortal and immortal worlds was particularly thin. In modern times, Mount Olympus has become a popular hiking destination, with established trails leading to the summit. Thousands of people climb the mountain each year, following routes that may not be so different from the pilgrimage paths used by ancient Greeks seeking to approach the sacred mountain. Another supremely important sacred site was Delphi, located on the southwestern slopes of Mount Parnassus in central Greece. Delphi was the location of the most famous oracle in the ancient world. the sanctuary of Apollo, where the Pythia priestess delivered prophecies that influenced the decisions of rulers and common people alike. Before it became known as Delphi, the site was called Pytho, a name connected to the myth of Apollo slaying Python. According to the legend, Apollo killed Python, a serpent that had guarded an earlier oracle associated with Gaia and other primordial deities. By killing Python and taking over the oracle, Apollo transformed Pytho into Delphi, making it his sacred sanctuary. Archaeological evidence shows that the sanctuary at Delphi developed over centuries. The earliest structures date to around the 8th century BCE, and the site grew progressively more elaborate with each succeeding century. The main temple, the Temple of Apollo, underwent several reconstructions, with major building campaigns in the 6th century BCE and again in the 4th century BCE. The temple housed the sacred inner chamber, the Adyton, where the Pythia would sit and enter her trance state. The site included many other structures beyond the main temple. A theatre was carved into the mountainside, used for performances and religious ceremonies. An ancient stadium hosted athletic competitions held in connection with Apollo's worship. Various treasuries were built by different Greek city-states, each seeking to honor Apollo and display their own wealth and piety. These structures reflected the immense importance of Delphi to the entire Greek world. The Delphi Archaeological Museum preserves many of the artifacts discovered at the site: sculptures, votive offerings, inscriptions, and other materials that illuminate the history and religious significance of the sanctuary. The museum allows modern visitors to understand the richness and complexity of religious life at Delphi. Another important sacred site was Dion, located in northern Greece at the base of Mount Olympus. Dion was a sacred city dedicated to Zeus and the other Olympian gods. Archaeological excavations have revealed extensive remains at the site, including temples, theatres, and residential areas. Dion appears to have been continuously inhabited and religiously significant from the 5th century BCE through the 5th century CE, a span of over 1,000 years. Beyond these major sanctuaries, the Greek landscape was dotted with countless smaller shrines, sacred springs, and holy groves. Pilgrimage routes connected these sites, forming networks that allowed the faithful to visit multiple sacred locations. Inscriptions, votive offerings, and architectural remains found at these locations paint a detailed picture of a landscape thoroughly infused with religious significance. Water sources were particularly sacred. Springs and rivers were understood as dwelling places of nymphs and water deities. Sacred groves, where certain trees or forests were protected from cutting, served as sanctuaries for the gods and places where mortals could approach the divine. Caves were understood as liminal spaces, places where the boundary between the ordinary world and the divine realm was particularly permeable. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. The geography of sacred sites was not confined to mainland Greece. As the Greeks colonized the Mediterranean and the shores of the Black Sea from the 8th to the 6th centuries BCE, they carried their religious beliefs and mythological traditions with them. New sanctuaries were established in distant lands, often dedicated to the same gods worshipped in Greece. This process of colonization led to a geographic spread of Greek mythology. Myths that had originated in Greece were adapted to new contexts, influenced by local traditions and deities, and reinterpreted in light of new environments. At the same time, the colonists maintained their connection to the homeland by continuing to worship the same gods, maintaining the same myths, and often visiting the great sanctuaries of Greece to consult oracles or make pilgrimages. The city of Syracuse in Sicily, for example, established by Greek colonists, maintained strong religious and cultural ties to Greece. Similarly, Greek settlements along the coast of what is now Turkey brought Greek religious practices to Asia Minor. Greek colonies on the shores of the Black Sea spread Greek religion even further. This expansion of Greek culture through colonization meant that mythology became a unifying force across the Mediterranean world. Greek colonists in distant lands shared the same gods, told the same stories, and participated in the same religious festivals as their cousins back in Greece. The myths provided a common identity and cultural bond. Archaeological and architectural evidence confirms the historical reality of these sacred sites. Excavations have revealed temples, altars, votive offerings, inscriptions, and other remains that document religious practices across centuries. These findings corroborate the literary sources and provide material evidence of the sacred geography that defined Greek religious life. The relationship between mythology and geography in ancient Greece was profound and reciprocal. On one hand, the real geography of Greece, its mountains, valleys, rivers, and coastlines, provided the physical settings for mythological narratives. Mount Olympus, the highest mountain, naturally became the home of the gods. The dramatic gorges and caves of Greece became the dwelling places of nymphs and minor deities. On the other hand, mythology gave meaning and significance to the geography. A mountain was not merely a natural formation, but the dwelling place of Zeus. A spring was not merely a water source, but the home of a nymph. A grove of trees was not merely a forest, but a sacred space where the divine could be encountered. Through mythology, the landscape became sacred, invested with religious meaning and significance. Pilgrimage sites became centers of religious and cultural activity. People traveled to these sacred places seeking oracles, healing, or divine favor. They left offerings and votive inscriptions recording their requests and gratitude. These sites became gathering places where people from different regions could meet, exchange ideas, and reinforce their common identity as Greeks. The artistic and architectural features of these sacred sites, elaborate temple decorations, sculptural programs, painted pottery, inscribed dedications, enrich our understanding of how the ancient Greeks expressed their religious beliefs through material culture. These sites were not merely places of worship, but also showcases for artistic achievement and civic pride. Archaeological surveys have identified hundreds of smaller shrines and sanctuaries throughout Greece, in addition to the famous major sites. This widespread distribution of sacred places demonstrates how thoroughly the Greek landscape was infused with religious significance. Nearly every community had its own local shrines and deities, while also maintaining connections to the pan-Hellenic sanctuaries that served all Greeks. The myths connecting these sacred places to gods and heroes remain religious and cultural narratives. Explanations for why particular places were sacred, how they came to be associated with specific deities, and what spiritual significance they held. These are mythological associations, not historical facts, yet they were taken seriously by the ancient Greeks and shaped how they understood and valued their landscape. Thus, Greek sacred geography demonstrates the intimate connection between mythology and reality in ancient Greek culture. The real mountains, valleys, rivers, and coastlines of Greece provided the physical foundation for an elaborate system of religious belief and practice. Through mythology, the landscape was transformed into a sacred realm where mortals could encounter the divine, seek guidance, and express their devotion. The result was a uniquely integrated religious landscape where physical geography and mythological significance were inseparably intertwined. The myths of ancient Greece survived and were transmitted to us primarily through literature. The poets who composed and recorded these stories, Homer, Hesiod, and many others, preserved narratives that might otherwise have been lost to time. Without these literary sources, our knowledge of Greek mythology would be vastly diminished. Homer stands as perhaps the most famous and influential poet of ancient Greece. He is credited with composing two of the greatest epic poems ever written, the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad recounts the story of the Trojan War, focusing particularly on the hero Achilles and his struggles during the conflict. The Odyssey describes the journey home of Odysseus after the war's conclusion, a 10-year voyage filled with adventures and trials. The exact dating of Homer's compositions remains uncertain and is a matter of scholarly debate. Most scholars agree that Homer lived sometime in the late 8th century BCE or early 7th century BCE, placing him around 750 to 700 BCE. However, some scholars argue for earlier dates, while others suggest later ones. The uncertainty reflects the difficulties in dating ancient texts when we have no definitive biographical information about their author. The question of Homer's identity is equally complex. Some scholars believe that Homer was a single historical person who composed both the Iliad and the Odyssey. Others argue that Homer may be a collective name referring to multiple poets whose works were eventually compiled into the two epics we know today. Some scholars have even questioned whether Homer was a real person at all, suggesting that the name might be a legendary attribution. What is certain is that the Iliad and Odyssey were composed during the period when Greece was transitioning from an oral culture to a literate one. The Greek alphabet was adopted around 800 BCE, though writing did not immediately displace oral tradition. For some time, both oral recitation and written texts coexisted. Another major source for Greek mythology is Hesiod, who composed the Theogony and the Works and Days. Hesiod was active sometime around 750 to 650 BCE, placing him roughly contemporary with Homer, or possibly slightly later. The Theogony is the most complete account we have of the creation of the cosmos and the genealogy of the gods. It traces the divine lineages from chaos through the primordial deities, the Titans, and finally to the Olympians. The chronological relationship between Homer and Hesiod is debated by scholars. Which poet came first? Did they influence each other? Were they contemporaries? Or did one come significantly later than the other? Ancient Greek tradition held that Homer was the earlier poet, but modern scholarship has not definitively settled the question. The ancient Greek philosopher Xenophanes, writing in the 6th century BCE, famously stated that Homer had been the first teacher of Greece. By this, he meant that Homer's epics had provided Greek children with their fundamental education about the gods, heroes, and moral values. The Iliad and Odyssey were memorized, quoted, and used as educational texts throughout Greek society. A fascinating ancient text called The Contest of Homer and Hesiod describes a competition between the two poets, with judges deciding who was the better poet. Though this text is likely fictional, it reflects the high regard in which both poets were held and the importance of their works in Greek culture. After Homer and Hesiod, other poets contributed to the preservation and development of Greek mythology. Apollonius of Rhodes, writing in the 3rd century BCE, composed the Argonautica, an epic poem about Jason's quest for the Golden Fleece. This work draws on earlier tradition, while also providing its own interpretation of the myths. The lyric poets also contributed to the mythological tradition, Pindar, writing in the 5th century BCE, composed victriodes that frequently reference mythological events and heroes. These poems demonstrate how mythology remained central to Greek cultural life even in later periods. The tragic playwrights, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, all drew heavily on mythological themes. Their plays, performed at festivals in Athens, presented new interpretations of familiar myths, exploring their tragic dimensions and psychological complexities. Through drama, mythology was continually reinterpreted and revitalized for new audiences. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. Before writing existed, Greek mythology was transmitted through oral tradition. Professional storytellers and poets would memorize vast amounts of narrative material and recite it at religious festivals, at royal courts, and at public gatherings. The stories evolved slightly with each telling, adapted to different audiences and contexts, yet maintained continuity through the core narrative framework. Oral transmission created a living, dynamic tradition. Stories could be updated to reflect current events or new insights. Different regional variations could develop as communities adapted familiar myths to local contexts. Yet the fundamental narrative structures remain stable, preserved through the memories of trained professionals who had devoted their lives to mastering and transmitting the tradition. The development of the Greek alphabet around 800 BCE marked a crucial transition point. Once writing became available, myths could be recorded in permanent form. This did not immediately eliminate oral tradition. For many centuries, both oral and written transmission coexisted, but gradually, written texts became the primary means by which myths were preserved and transmitted. The standardization of written myths through texts like Homer's epics and Hesiod's Theogony had important consequences. When stories were written down, they became fixed in a particular form. Different versions could still exist, but they existed in a more permanent and verifiable way. Regional variations were recorded and preserved, rather than being lost as oral tradition evolved. Religious festivals and dramatic performances served as important occasions for the performance and transmission of myths. The Dionysia festival in Athens included dramatic performances of plays based on mythological themes. These festivals brought together large audiences and ensured that myths remained central to community life. As Greek civilization spread throughout the Mediterranean and beyond through colonization and conquest, mythology spread with it. Greek myths were encountered by peoples of other cultures, who sometimes incorporated them into their own traditions or adapted them to their local context. This process of cultural encounter and exchange enriched both Greek and non-Greek traditions. After the classical period of ancient Greece, Alexandria became a major center of scholarly activity. The Alexandrian scholars, working in the famous Library of Alexandria, systematically collected and studied Greek texts. They compiled versions of Homer and other poets, created concordances and commentaries, and worked to standardize the texts. These scholarly efforts were crucial in preserving Greek literature for future generations. The Alexandrian scholars also worked on compiling comprehensive versions of Greek myths, drawing on all available literary sources. They created systematic catalogues of gods, heroes, and mythological events. Their work made it possible to understand the full scope of Greek mythology, even when individual sources were fragmentary or incomplete. When the Romans conquered Greece, they encountered Greek civilization and were profoundly influenced by it. Roman poets like Virgil and Ovid drew extensively on Greek mythology. Ovid's Metamorphoses, written in the 1st century CE, is a vast compilation of mythological tales, many of them Greek in origin. This work ensured that Greek myths were transmitted to Roman audiences and eventually to all of Western civilization. Later Christian scholars, despite the conflict between pagan mythology and Christian theology, preserved many Greek texts. During the Middle Ages, monasteries preserved classical texts, including works containing Greek mythology. This preservation, often for purely scholarly or linguistic reasons, ensured that classical literature survived through the Christian period. During the Islamic Golden Age, Arabic scholars translated and preserved Greek philosophical and mythological texts. These translations allowed the knowledge to survive and eventually be transmitted back to Europe during and after the Renaissance. When these texts were translated from Arabic back into Latin and other European languages, the Renaissance saw a revival of interest in classical texts, including Greek mythology. Humanist scholars translated Homer and other Greek poets into European languages, making them accessible to broader audiences. This rediscovery and revival of classical learning shaped European thought and culture profoundly. The discovery and decipherment of Linear B, an ancient Greek writing system, in the 20th century, provided new evidence about Greek culture in the Bronze Age. This discovery showed that mythology had even older roots than previously thought, with some gods and religious practices traceable back to Mycenaean times. Modern scholarship continues to study and interpret Greek mythology. New translations of ancient texts appear regularly, each offering new insights and nuances. Archaeological discoveries provide material evidence that complements literary sources. Comparative mythology and religious studies provide frameworks for understanding how Greek myths functioned in their original society. Thus, Greek mythology was preserved and transmitted through a sophisticated literary tradition. Oral poets memorized vast narrative traditions and performed them at public gatherings. Written texts, beginning with Homer and Hesiod, recorded these myths in permanent form. Later poets, playwrights, and scholars adapted, reinterpreted, and compiled the myths. Through all these processes, the myths survived antiquity and have come down to us today. This transmission process demonstrates the remarkable resilience of cultural traditions. Although these myths originated many centuries ago and are connected to times very different from our own, they have survived wars, conquests, religious transformations, and radical changes in how people view the world. They continue to influence literature, art, and thinking in modern times. Through the dedicated work of poets, scholars, and scribes across millennia, Greek mythology has become a permanent inheritance of Western civilization.